Let's get into it. Jubilee, transgender conservatives versus transgender liberals. As a transgender leftist myself, I want to see what's up with this.
Being a non-binary person that sometimes has the choice to either go into a men's restroom looking like this. So you can look at me looking like this.
It's just interesting that I thought this was a trans debate. That's what I thought.
Non-binary people.
Non-binary people fall under the trans umbrella. Yeah. So I don't know, maybe you can educate yourself a little bit on that.
I think I can educate you.
Then you would figure out,
I think I can educate
you know, what reality is.
Oh, whoa.
Oh no. Oh no. Okay, so that was a rhetorical flop, and I want to go over why that was a flop and what could have been done better. Oh my goodness. So that non-binary person is bringing up the point that, like, binary bathrooms are often kind of dangerous for non-binary people, especially if they look very genderqueer. And we even have data studies which show that non-binary people are at an increased risk of being sexually assaulted in these kind of binary bathrooms. That is a really good point that you can bring up. And the reason why Blair White had to go for an attack of, like, you know, I don't want to be in community with non-binary people is because Blair can't respond to that point. So what you need to do is point out that, you know, I don't really care whether or not you, Blair, want to be in community with me. I care about protecting non-binary people who are often forced to go into this binary world where they are more likely to be assaulted in a bathroom. And that you can even point out that, like, she's trying to deflect because she can't respond to that. But see, the entire reason why Blair White went for that deflection is because if she can paint you as the conservatives' caricature of an SJW who gets triggered and is easy to set off, then, like, she can disregard everything that you're saying to her audience. And you took the bait. Oh my gosh. Oh, this is going to be frustrating. All right, let's dive into it.
It is a safety concern for trans women to share a female restroom.
It's not. We actually have data on this. All available peer-reviewed data shows that transgender people, trans women especially, are disproportionately the victims, not the perpetrators, of crimes, particularly assaults and privacy violations in bathrooms. And yet, we also have data which shows that when we pass laws which protect trans people's rights to bathrooms, there is no increase in assault or privacy violations. Yet when we pass laws that restrict trans people's rights to bathrooms, you do see an increase in assault and privacy violations, especially to transgender women. And also, these kind of policies that restrict trans people's rights to bathrooms are wildly unpopular. You can look at, like, any polling data. Like, there was some data from The Hill, there was some data from Pew Research. All of these, you know, major data collection centers showed that these kind of policies are wildly unpopular, especially among women. Women are more likely to be totally fine with trans people in their bathrooms than men are, actually. So both if you want to go from the democratic standpoint and from just the reality of the data standpoint, it's a slam dunk win. There's no problem with trans people going to pee where they feel most comfortable, where is safest for them.
Before we begin this episode, we know there's been a lot of anticipation for this topic.
That is why we're excited to release an extended
Oh my gosh, they had to do this entire thing just because Blair White was, like, going on a tirade on social media before the release? That's crazy.
Of this episode featuring all prompts on our Middle Ground Patreon.
This is something that you guys have been asking us about for years, and we're excited to finally be able to do it.
Okay.
And that is the point of Middle Ground.
It depends. Yes.
So I think that to start it off, though, too, is it's not necessarily saying that trans women, it all comes down to self-ID.
I mean, the prompt did explicitly say trans women, but if you want to change the prompt, okay.
Moved into a self-ID process. There are a lot of people.
Also, to act like we're moving into a self-ID process for bathrooms ignores that that's always how bathrooms have worked. Like, there's not a guard at bathrooms that check people's IDs or, like, check people's genitals. Like, the way that this has been working the entire time is that you go into the bathroom of the gender which you feel most safe and comfortable in, which for trans people is going to be the gender they transition to, for cis people, just the gender they were assigned at birth, and this works out. It has worked out the entire time. Trans people are disproportionately victims, not perpetrators of crimes in these spaces.
There are a lot of men just simply self-IDing into being trans women to utilize the female restroom and to harm women.
Yeah, so that's a crime because you said harm. Like, as soon as somebody commits a harm, then a crime has occurred and you can arrest that person. That's how it's always worked. And that's how it'll continue to work, even if trans people go into the bathroom as well.
Or
That's the
just
biggest
be
thing.
there. They're getting arousal from just being there.
You know, there was a photo or it was a video that went viral, I think like just 2 weeks ago, with some like whole man.
It's like these people want crime to be illegal, and it's like, yes, crime should be illegal, but what you're describing is already a crime.
With a boner in the women's restroom, and there's just some poor woman filming it. Like, am I just supposed to like accept that this is here? So I think there's levels to it. I think that trans women who are actually trans, you know, we're talking gender dysphoria, transitions, making the effort, you know, probably once you reach a certain point in your transition where you can actually assimilate within that space and not cause a disruptance, that would probably be the ideal time to start doing that, right?
By the way, we even have data which shows that trans people, especially early in transition, tend to avoid restrooms altogether. If you look at the polling from the Transgender survey, it was like the largest survey of trans people that's ever been done. What they showed is that most trans people early in transition actually just avoided bathrooms entirely until they were further enough in their transition that they felt safe and comfortable to go into a bathroom of the gender they identify with. So, yeah, once again, just showing that the way that bathrooms currently work is fine. Like, that it's worked and it continues to work.
As, you know, a cross-dresser who is emboldened to, in this current climate, say that they're trans, because now anything is trans if you say so, that person should probably stay absolutely out of women's restrooms, because you're there to get your rocks off and the women are there to take a poop and a pee.
Right, but if you're committing voyeurism, that's already a crime. Like, that's already make crime illegal. Yes, it's already illegal.
It's not the same. And, you know, I really empathize with women who, you know, have an issue with it. And I can probably hear some women commenting, well, how do I know the difference between a fetishist and a real trans person? It's hard. It's hard. However,
The real answer is mind your own business, and if someone's causing a problem, then you can report that a crime has occurred. Like, if you just mind your own business, go poo poo pee pee, get out, and nothing bad happened, boom, great, that's good. If there is a creep in the bathroom committing voyeurism, then you can call the police, or you can report it to security. Like, if somebody's, like, taking pictures under stalls or doing other inappropriate things, like, that's when a crime's occurred, and you can report that. You don't really need to, like, discern someone's gender identity, because we've actually seen this play out in practice. Data shows that when people try to, like, police entry to bathrooms, oftentimes the victims of that are just gender nonconforming cis women, or, like, butch lesbians, where there was even a news story just the other day about, like, a butch lesbian that was attacked by someone because they thought that she was trans when she was just a masculine cisgender woman. Like, the kind of fear-mongering which Blair's promoting actually hurts all women.
there's different reasons people are trans, and some people really are trans because they're horny, and some people are trans because they really felt that way from, you know, a young age or whatever.
If someone's trans just because they're horny, why would you, like, transition? That doesn't even make sense. How can you be trans just because you're... Like, if something is just in the bedroom, you just keep that in the bedroom. Nobody is transitioning genders because of horny. That is not a thing that's happening.
See, I agree to an extent. Like, when you go to transition, and this is a fairly universal experience, you know, once you get to a certain point of passing, that's about the time that you would start going into the other bathroom, as opposed to not make the same sex uncomfortable. Once you reach that point in your transition, a lot of things change, but, you know, you start to see things from another perspective. You start to see things from the perspective of a cis person.
And like we said, based off of the data we have from the trans survey, that's how the overwhelming majority of trans people act.
I actually offer some solutions to this, because I believe the free market can handle all of this stuff, because in government-run and government-funded buildings,
Free market transphobia? Let's hear the proposal.
there should always be a third space for us to use. And I do. When I go to the Capitol and stuff like that, I always use third spaces. But I think that private property owners
Oh no.
can make the rules for their establishment and figure.
Oh no. Oh, we're getting really close to repealing the Civil Rights Act here. So, fun fact, but in the Jim Crow South, we actually tried this, where we tried, you know, there was a bit of a culture war at the time regarding whether or not black people should be allowed to use the same restrooms as white people. And we actually tried this where private corporations could set their own policies for whether or not, like, black people can go to the bathroom and stuff like that. And turns out it was just heinous and just resulted in discrimination and violence and a bunch of other horrible shit. But when we passed the Civil Rights Act, people learned to deal with it and move on. Oh my goodness, it's so historically deft to be like, yeah, let's just repeal the Civil Rights Act. Oh my goodness.
Figure out how to enforce those rules.
I mean, I wouldn't say third spaces for trans
Exactly.
people.
Like
just
we're in a state right
general.
now. We're in a state right now where you have to allow anybody to use whatever restroom they want.
And the other thing about like private businesses setting their own rules, you're gonna have your own enforcement mechanism for that, which once again, every single time somebody's tried to propose an enforcement mechanism, it just ends up disproportionately hurting butch lesbians, masculine cisgender women, not feminine trans girls, because feminine trans girls tend to just be perceived as girls, and that's it.
I filmed a YouTube video a few years ago where I entered a men's restroom just because I was responding to comments who were like, well, maybe you should use a men's restroom if you really feel like the way you feel. And so I said, okay, let's do it. Let's put a camera. And I was kicked out within seconds of the entire establishment, and it was a whole ruckus. So that's what I mean by, if you're a decent person, you do what causes the least amount of problems for people around you. And if you're, you know, a moral person, you're going to be conflict avoidant in general when it's something like that, right? It's like, what's the point of causing issues for anyone, especially if you're really just trying to pee?
Just put
get
your
it
head
done.
down, go in, get out.
Right.
Yeah, once again, that's how the overwhelming majority of trans people act, but Blair can never admit that because it goes against her narrative that, like, she's one of the good ones and all these other trans people are just, like, trying to cause trouble. This whole time, talking about, like, voyeurism, and then Blair was filming in a bathroom.
The one thing I kept hearing through all of the nuance is passability. Because ultimately, when we talk about passability, it determines how you get harassed in the bathroom. Because honestly, if you don't look so passable or whatnot, people are going to say, oh, that's a man with a dress on, and then there's going to be discourse. But the reality of it is, honestly,
if you're going to approach a rebuttal from the passability angle, I think the best way to do it is to talk about masculine cis women. And you can bring up numerous examples or data that exists on how butch lesbians and masculine cis women are the ones who are disproportionately harassed in these bathrooms, especially when transphobic policies are passed, showing that, you know, like this kind of transphobic legislation has collateral damage and hurting all women. It's a lot stronger than just being kind of in like a philosophical zone of like, you know, passing trans women versus non-passing trans women.
who cares who's trans and who's cis going in the bathroom? You should be minding your own business, being able to pee and do your business in peace for the most part. That conversation around this man with a boner on or whatever like that, I saw that picture and I thought to myself, that's really a right-wing talking point and conservative propaganda because that's their ideology.
How is it
when it comes to trans?
happened.
I'm speaking. That's their ideology when it comes to trans. It's because conservatives have a basic level understanding of.
So I think the point that she's trying to demonstrate here is the fact that, like, once again, the actual data shows that trans people are disproportionately not committing crime. Like, they're disproportionately less likely to commit crimes in bathrooms. However, that doesn't stop libs of TikTok and other right-wing social media platforms from just collecting every single anecdote of a transgender person commits a crime and then, like, signal boosting that to a wider conservative audience. That is a good point that you can make, but I don't think that she's articulating that point quite well here.
Transness is in the first place. And with all due respect, I do not think any of you are basic, but they use you as the baseline to amplifying this propaganda.
How is it propaganda if it's a thing that really happened? It was caught on video. Like, it was an actual occurrence. It wasn't staged. It happened, and that's not the only. It's not an isolated incident.
So if you can demonstrate that these kind of incidents are statistically less likely to happen, and yet they're statistically more likely to be signal boosted by libs of TikTok and other platforms, you can absolutely demolish her on what she just said.
Who knows? They could have been an actor.
Oh no. No, the data's on your side here, Blossom. You just have to know the data. Oh gosh.
Passability politics is really a thing in our trans community, especially when we come to the debate of restrooms.
Well, you can say it's politics, but actually it's just real life, right? It's just about where you're able to assimilate to and where you're not. And I think one of the big...
Oh no, I don't think she's doing a good job explaining her points at all. That's really frustrating.
The community, by and large, has seemed to reject assimilation and seems hell-bent on...
That's not true.
I think it's absolutely true, which is you see people talking about how you don't need to work on your transition at all to enter women's restrooms. And I think that is so selfish.
That drives me crazy.
It's so disregarding of women who may or may not feel uncomfortable.
Once again, what Blair White's doing is signal boosting a completely fringe strawman position. Like, the overwhelming majority of trans people do avoid bathrooms until they feel comfortable going to the bathroom. And what Blossom just needs to do is call out that Blair White's doing the exact same thing that she was talking about earlier, where you signal boost an incredibly fringe minority thing that happens like, say, a crime committed by a trans person in a bathroom, when that's statistically likely to not happen, and then trying to make a whole outrage about it. Like, most trans people avoid bathrooms altogether until they feel like they can assimilate into a bathroom, go unnoticed. That's just the reality of what most trans people do, and we have data on this.
But the trans woman experience is not monolithic, so who are we to police transness? Why are we policing other people's transness and how they show up?
We have to protect women.
Oh, and then if Blair White jumps into the I'm just listening to women, you can bring up the poll data, which shows that most women are completely comfortable sharing a bathroom with a trans person. There's so many like slam dunk responses to everything that Blair is saying, but nobody is taking those free wins.
We're listening to women, and if you have 50%, we won't say 50%, but if you have a large chunk of the population of women saying that they are uncomfortable.
See, Blair White had to redirect from 50% to a large chunk because Blair knows that the poll data is against her. Yeah, 54% of women saying transgender people should be able to use the bathroom that best aligns with their identity. Majority of women, if you want to listen to women, like Blair is saying, women say that they are comfortable sharing a bathroom with trans people.
A good person leans in and listens.
So why
they
are
don't
you
just
not listening
reject
to
it.
other trans women, Blair?
I do all day. I am right
so,
now.
But you didn't, and I'm not trying to.
Oh no! Ah, this is so frustrating.
Seem to be looking at through the lens of always trans being the priority, and I'm looking at it through the lens of women being the priority here.
Oh my gosh! If you know the data, you can absolutely demolish Blair on this. But once again, you can even take the position of I care about the safety of all people, and the data will show that that would lead to supporting trans-inclusive bathroom policies because there is no increase in assault and privacy violations when trans people are allowed to use the bathrooms they identify with, yet there is a drastic increase in assault and privacy violations when trans people are forced to use bathrooms associated with their birth sex. I mean, I would not come to like a Jubilee panel this unprepared. I think that that's irresponsible. Because Blossom is kind of like flip-flopping and not really like committing to a solid position, then Blair White can make herself seem like the reasonable person of being like, well, I'm not that crazy conservative. You know, I just want trans people to be like a little bit harmed. Oh, this is so frustrating.
I can understand like how some women may feel unsafe with men in the restroom. Men, when I say men, I mean men. I'm not talking about trans women. So being a non-binary person that sometimes has the choice to either go into a men's restroom looking like this, you can look at me, looking like this.
It's just interesting. I thought this was a trans debate. That's what I thought.
Even.
Non-binary people fall under the trans umbrella.
No, they don't.
Don't take the bait.
So I don't know. Maybe you could educate yourself a little bit on that.
I think I
and
could
maybe
educate
then you would figure out.
I think I could educate you.
What
right?
the reality is.
I'm
and what
sure there's
trans
a
actually means.
non-binary Jubilee episode.
As we talked about it at the beginning, this kind of rhetorical position that they're taking is really not effective in this kind of setting. Just pro tip in general, if you're going to a kind of event where you're trying to speak, you're trying to convince people, phrases like go educate yourself does not come off as like enlightening or helpful. It just comes off as condescending. And Blair's entire strategy here is to paint you as a condescending, triggered SJW, which you completely fell into her bait. Like I said earlier, if you could get back to the point that you're talking about the very real reality that non-binary people are more likely to be assaulted in bathrooms because this world wasn't built for non-binary people, and you want to do something to protect all people, including non-binary people, and Blair White trying to, play like gossiping games about, who's my friend, who's in my community, is just a meaningless distraction from the real issue that is non-binary people being assaulted at a disproportionate rate. Like you can absolutely crucify her for trying to distract from the main point like that if you don't fall for her bait.
Well, because it's not a debate about who is really trans and who is not.
It can be.
We're talking about restrooms. As a trans non-binary person.
They're getting back on point. All right, nail it home.
To a place that only has men's and women's restrooms, and I'm dressed like this. Mm-hmm. My choice to go into the men's restroom at that point puts me in danger.
I think they cut them short there. I know that Jubilee is pretty known for cutting things up significantly, cutting down arguments and stuff like that. I feel like they could have brought that home a little bit more, but it was good that they got back on topic at the end. But also maybe they did bring it home more, but they cut them short.
6 years ago, it was never an issue for me to use the women's room. Girls would literally drag me in there with them and say, girl, you need to be in our bathroom. And I was like, I felt uncomfortable back then. I don't pass. I know I don't pass, so that's a me problem. And I'm not gonna turn my fear of being attacked in the men's room into a woman's problem. It's still a me problem. So I need to work on myself. And it sucks. Does it suck? Yes, it sucks. I don't pass. I know I don't pass.
I think that her discussion on passing is very like online centric. So often these conversations about passing devolve into like a terminally online like Instagram model idea of what like women look like. But I mean, she looks like she could be any Karen of Walmart. Like if you just go into the bathroom looking like that in a Walmart, you're not going to look out of place. Like really, because of how much cis people tend to just forget that we exist as trans people, if you just tip the scales like slightly in one direction or the other, most people are not even going to bat an eye. Like, yeah, I mean, middle-aged women kind of just look like that sometimes.
Some trans people aren't capable of handling themselves against a man, but I am confident in my ability to do that. And not everybody can, I get that. But it's just now, 6 years ago, I used to use the women's room. Now I don't, because women have spoke out. They've come out and said, we're not comfortable. There's too many self-ID'd people out there.
That's so sad. Like, she's bought into this completely untrue narrative that like women are concerned about trans people in bathrooms when like the poll data we showed earlier shows that most women are totally comfortable. Like she's bought into the conservative propaganda that's just lying about what women actually believe. Like the whole like TERF anti-trans movement from women is like there are a whole bunch of extremely loud minority voices. Like most women are totally comfortable sharing a bathroom with a trans person. And it's so sad to see people internalize these lies that have just been propped up by an extremely vocal minority of hateful anti-trans bigots.
I can definitely actually almost empathize with a lot of trans women and their experience in the bathroom and a lot of the turmoil with going in and especially with passability. But the layer that I feel like in the conversation that's missing here is actually trans men.
Always good to bring up the trans men in the bathrooms. Let's see where he takes it.
And also the fact that I was born biologically female, and a lot of the things that trans women experience of violence in the bathroom is what I experienced as a child. So the reason why my education here is not necessarily to create an idea that I need to conform to Eurocentric standards. Myself, I'm a 6 foot tall trans man, size 13 shoe, so I don't fit into the Eurocentric standards of what a woman is, and I never did as a child. I was bullied relentlessly for this and isolated from many spaces. So this discussion about trans women being in the restroom also affects biological women because guess what? Biological women come in all shapes and sizes. There are, a lot of lesbian women that deal with this issue.
Okay, this dude is cooking. First off, very good to just like acknowledge everybody and like come at it from a very empathetic angle. And then highlighting, masculine cis women, trans men who would be pushed into the female bathroom under like transphobic policies. Dude is cooking. Very, very solid, very solid. Another thing that I want to point out, when the man speaks, nobody's interrupting him. Whenever like women or non-binary people were talking in this panel, so much interruption, but like they'll let the man say his piece, which goes to show something about how even amongst these trans people, like we internalize gendered standards of like respecting men and disrespecting women to such an intense extent.
It's not even being discussed in any mainstream that this is just completely wiped out and that you're standing up for women, but you're not standing up for women children. You're not standing up for biological females that are children. You're only standing up for what really affects you. And it's kind of sad that the idea that passability is you need to work on your transition.
Yeah, he's also doing a lot to like kind of pull together some of the points that the other lefties were trying to bring up, but like actually making the point. I think we found our champion thus far.
Have no access to finances, resources, jobs, to even get their foot in the door to get access to hormones. So you're putting all of these barriers just for them to be able to go to the restroom, which is a natural thing that we all have to do. So what do I need to do? Piss outside? Because that's how I was treated my entire childhood.
I just feel like when this whole topic comes up, like it obviously goes back to like, there's dudes like jerking off in the bathroom and like, to me, like when I hear that, I'm like, okay, like, but that's not trans women. So when we talk about this conversation, and it seems like the fear is like literally cisgender straight men who are being creeps. And what sucks is cis straight men can be like creepy, and then it's like trans women and trans men are like paying the price for that.
Talking about how trans women are being blamed for the crimes of cisgender men, solid point. But you could even bring it home further by bringing up that like the kind of crimes we're talking about are already crimes. Like, you don't need to pass transphobic legislation to persecute the cis men who are committing crimes.
For so many trans women and so many trans men, the safest place for them is the bathroom that aligns with their gender. And if you go to a place where it's illegal to do that, or you have to go on like, what's your ID or like your birth certificate, it puts you in an objectively unsafe situation.
Or you can look at Florida right now, where it's actually illegal for a trans person to use either bathroom. In Florida, somebody can tell somebody to leave the bathroom because they think that they're transgender, and that person is required to leave the bathroom or be arrested. So, like, literally, if somebody thinks you're transgender in either direction, you can be banned from using bathrooms entirely in Florida.
If I walk in the women's room, I mean, I know I like look like I look 12, but like I feel like someone would be like, get out of here, you know what I mean? But like, that's the vibe. Like, I think
that was funny. Him bringing up, even if I were to go into like the women's bathroom, they'd be like, you look like you're 12, but get out of here.
Your average cross-dresser can identify as a trans woman.
But then it's not a trans woman.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way. I feel that way as well. I agree with you wholeheartedly. However, with the state of the political correctness within the trans community, you can't really say that. Like, that person is...
I mean, they did just say that, even from like the lefty lib side. But like, if somebody is just your average cross-dresser, then they don't sincerely identify as the other gender, which means they wouldn't even meet the common definition of transgender, being someone who identifies as a gender other than the one they were assigned at birth. So Blair saying a common crossdresser could identify as a certain gender, like either they do identify and they are transgender, or they don't identify and they're not. Like, Blair trying to have it both ways is creating a contradictory scenario, which just isn't true.
They say that they're trans, but they're a crossdresser.
Well, if they say that they're trans, is this Blair just saying, like, this is just like a trans person that I don't think is pretty, and therefore they're not actually trans? Like, if they genuinely identify as trans and they're not causing a problem, like, what's the issue there? Also, we know that most trans people avoid bathrooms until they feel that they can enter without causing any trouble.
But we have to combat it with facts, with research.
Then why didn't you bring any facts or research to the table? Like, I'm with you, Blossom, but if you're gonna say that, you gotta bring the facts and the research to the table.
We're teaching them about us. And I just really think we cannot afford to be intellectually dishonest about our experiences as trans people.
That could be a really good point if you could bring up like an example of Blair's disingenuous framing, like in the debate. Like if you brought up when Blair attacked the non-binary person for being non-binary instead of actually discussing their legitimate concern about non-binary people being disproportionately assaulted in bathrooms. Yeah. Or bring up how, like, you know, Blair and the other conservatives have been signal boosting crimes which are statistically less likely to be committed by trans people to try to, like, dunk on the trans people they don't like. Like, if you can follow it up with a solid example, it's a good point.
You have to be on hormones or something like that for 2 years or something before you can even change your ID, like across the board. That would eliminate the cross-dressers from being able to go there, because then you can say, hey...
Actually, even under just like a self-ID model for like government-issued IDs, this eliminates like the cross-dresser problem, because cross-dressers don't go through the trouble to change their ID. It's that simple. Like, a cross-dresser is not going to go through all the trouble of getting like a driver's license that says female just so that they can commit voyeurism in a bathroom. Like, they would just commit voyeurism in a bathroom. It's that simple. But like, either way, regardless of whether or not they go through the process of changing their ID, voyeurism is still a crime and you can still charge them. So like, what's on their ID shouldn't matter. What should matter is whether or not they committed a crime. Ah, kitty. Oh my gosh. Hello, Percy. Percy decided to show up and knock up my camera.
I support the transgender military ban.
Okay, this is gonna be wild if anyone steps forward. Yeah, all of them are like, we are not mentally capable of serving in the military. That's how much do you have to hate yourself to step forward on this one?
I think that oftentimes when you talk about trans people in the military, people forget that most places, if we're talking about feet on the ground and really going into war zones, are really dangerous for trans people.
I'm sorry. Feet on the ground war zones are really dangerous for people, full stop. Like, it's really dangerous for trans people to be on an armed battleground? No shit, it's dangerous for everybody. It's war. It's dangerous.
An extra risk.
You're talking about the culture that exists over
Yeah,
there.
the Middle
Yeah,
East, you
yeah.
know, it's like that's not exactly
the
trans
friendliest
friendly.
place
It's
for
actually
us,
the
yes.
opposite.
But once again, if you're talking about like on the ground troops, that's not like integrating into a culture. That's being in like a U.S. military base off seas, which would follow like U.S. laws and code. So you wouldn't need to like be transgender within a trans accepting culture if you're at a U.S. military base because you're protected by the U.S. military base.
The medications that we take sometimes put us in conflict with being able to actually be combat ready.
What? Plenty of combat-ready soldiers take medicine. Pills, injections. I mean, those are the forms that, like, trans hormones come in. Like, you can get your T-shots or your estrogen pills on base, and then you can go fight in your battles. Like, that's the same way that all the other soldiers that take medicine do it. And also, like, the entire thing that we're talking about completely ignores, like, the fact that most positions in the military are not, like, on-the-ground soldiers. There's a lot of, like, tech people, like medics, other positions that are not like foot combat, that there's no reason a trans person would be incapable of serving.
Or a trans medic. I'm not exactly.
Oh, there we go. Okay, Blair is bringing it up.
Should athletes compete in sports, you know, but
Trans athletes?
yeah,
They
the
shouldn't.
drugs we take do weaken.
If trans people are just too dangerous to compete in sports for these conservatives, then how are they too weak to serve in the military? Like, how can it be that trans women are so much stronger than cis women in their worldview that, like, they cannot be allowed to compete in women's sports, but they're so much weaker that they can't be in the military like cis women. Like, cis women can be in the military, and if they believe that trans women are stronger than cis women on the sports thing, why wouldn't they also be stronger in the military? This is actually one of the elements of fascism and like fascist persecution of minorities, is that they have to view the persecuted minority as both strong and weak at the same time. Like, that's why you see, like, oh, trans women are just, like, you know, weak, vulnerable, crying SJWs, but also they will demolish your sisters in sports. Like, it's an entirely contradictory worldview. The only consistent part of that worldview is the hate and the bigotry towards a minority.
Or misrepresentation of what the trans ban actually did. You know, you have soldiers, if you have surgeries, they go on profile, which means they can't actually do their job. They can't do PT.
You're talking about somebody that got surgery while in the military? I mean, they have, like, leave, and they should have leave and stuff for that, but, like, getting a surgery shouldn't disqualify you from being in the military.
I don't mind somebody who is actually on hormones going there, because there's a lot of people, I mean, people take PTSD medications overseas. They actually take 6 months of medication with them. So a full-out ban I don't necessarily support, because I think that everybody in the military, as long as you can do your job.
Then why'd you walk forward on the prompt? Like, you just said you don't support an all-out ban. Why did you say you agree with the prompt?
And then also, you know, if we want to just get super real, you have the trans suicide rate. And if you really want to compound that by the veteran suicide rate.
Maybe we should, like, do something about the suicide rates. Like, maybe we should, you know, like, give better mental health treatment to trans people, to veterans. I mean, if you're genuinely concerned about, like, the suicide rate of veterans, then, like, just saying trans people shouldn't serve in the military doesn't actually do anything to fix that. Like, actually providing intensive mental health resources to veterans would actually do something to help that. Like, Blair is so disingenuous in that talking point. Because, like what is she saying that's going to actually support veterans with their mental health?
Trans ban could actually benefit us, and Lord knows I'm not trying to get drafted, so yeah, I'm all good with it.
Oh, okay. Blair's real point is that she wants the trans military ban because she's selfish and doesn't want to get drafted. That's pretty gross.
I think it's very discriminatory to keep trans people out of the military. We pay our bills here, we pay our taxes here, we are Americans. We deserve to serve this country as well. However,
solid so far. Let's go.
You all did raise some great points about the concern and safety of trans people. And I do agree that something does need to be done about that to protect us. Who's protecting us in the military?
Hopefully your brothers and sisters of arms and non-binary siblings of arms, as well as like having protections within the law. But yeah, so far actually good point, good rhetoric.
Discriminatory, I mean, that word sounds pretty, in today's climate, very much like, oh no, discrimination, but it's not always bad. Sometimes it's for the safety, and it's like, you know, when it comes to the military.
So I think that Blair White's right now just talking about like discrimination of like if somebody has a physical health condition that would prevent them from serving, then they wouldn't be allowed to serve. That would be more like eligibility requirements rather than like discrimination, kind of based on how we more generally use those words.
All trans people in the military.
Well, we can't waste
And so what if the
resources
best way to protect them
protecting
is not putting them in the Middle East with Muslims that are going to kill them?
Does Blair White think that like a trans person in the military who's in the Middle East is like living within a community of like Middle Easterners who are just going to be like transphobic to them and not that they're like on a US military base? I feel like Blair White just doesn't know anything about the military.
So as somebody who has worked in community service with community members directly, a lot of their suicide issues actually revolve around access to finances. And the military is one of the highest employers of transgender people. So we actually see the suicide rate drop. And
oh my gosh, my man coming at it.
And when you're on, a very strict regimen of, if you're trans and if you're really trans, and we can get into who's really trans later because I'm going to have to say about that, but if you're going to be on hormones.
Oh my gosh, Blair just taking every single point to try to provoke the non-binary person. But yeah, actually, this guy was bringing up the exact correct point that, hey, there's a lot of community programs that are actually dealing with mental health, and if you're truly concerned with mental health, you would support these kind of community problems and not disingenuously try to, like, weaponize trans people's suicide rate to support a trans military ban, which is going to end up harming trans people who are very frequently employed by the military because, especially if you're like a trans person who's kicked out of the home for being trans, it can be hard to find a job in a lot of places. It can hard to find a way that you can actually live. And the military ends up taking on a lot of trans people, both in trans people that have no other option and in trans people that are like repressing their transition and decide to like, go super deep into the military or like hypermasculinity, for example, is another reason why like a lot of trans people either were in the military or used to be in the military. So yeah, like cutting out this option as a potential employer for some of the most vulnerable populations, especially when they could get a job doing, like medical work or other kind of like service work within the military. It doesn't have to be like on the ground combat. That's just going to hurt some of the most vulnerable people in our entire population.
You guys have all forgotten the fact of what is the
as soon as the man doesn't want to be interrupted, they all silence.
flip side for these transgender individuals that are signing up for the military and they're taken out, and that was their life plan. Where are they supposed to work and where is their employment supposed to be?
No,
because
I
the
agree
mental
that-
illness that happens
I agree, it's
through
horrible.
homelessness and the lack of resources
agree,
that
it's
come.
horrible.
So that is also the flip side of that. So if folks
But they
don't
didn't
have,
kick
hold
anybody
on
out.
one second, but if they don't have access to a job that could offer them
Take your
support
job.
and research and access to medication, access to benefits, lifetime benefits, that's something that most transgender people in any sector of any
So
job.
do you want an answer to your question, or are you just going to round? Because I can answer, you said, what about those people that were kicked out? I actually think it's bad if you are someone who was in it and you really are, because just like, Sarah, and I've met many trans.
Wait, Blair thinks it's bad, but she stepped up because she says she agrees with the prompt. Like, is Blair just going to say, oh, it really sucks that the policies that I'm advocating for are going to harm trans people. Really sucks for them. Anyways, I still support the policy. Like, what the fuck kind of non-response is that?
Veterans that I've paid respect to publicly on social media, and I think that's amazing, actually. So if you're kicked out and...
Wait, Blair thinks that paying respects to veterans on social media is the same as, like, helping people who need access to resources because they were, like, kicked out of the home and they're gonna, like, starve and not get access to medicine and not be able to hold down a job unless they can go to a military position? Oh my gosh. Like, the amount of just, like, upper class, like, carelessness and disregard for people that have it worse than her is astounding.
And it was once, the norm
But
that
what's
you
the
could.
resources you're
I'm
offering
speaking
them,
though. If you're kicked out and it once was the norm for you to participate in the military, that's sad. But at the same time,
She can't answer because Blair White can never provide a solution. She can only say, that's a problem, that's bad. Because she's like, conservatives don't have solutions for problems. They just get angry about problems. And that's why she can't answer his question about, like, well, what resources would you provide for these people?
if that is what is determined for the ultimate safety and effectiveness of the military, nothing should come before that.
Blair, have you ever
Because the
worked
second
directly
bomb,
with
because
trans
the second
people?
bomb.
Have you ever worked
I
directly
am right
with,
now. I am right now.
No,
We're
directly
surrounded by
in
them.
services in terms of nonprofits
Sir,
and
she's
actually
a
getting
trans person.
clientele?
She's not
That's my
grassroots.
entire
She is
career.
not a grassroots.
Oh my goodness. Wait. So it's very clear that what he's talking about is doing, like, on the grounds organizing, community service, that kind of stuff, like actually getting resources into the hands of trans people in need, which is going to especially be like people of lower class, people who don't have access to money, don't have access to medicine, things like that. And she's like, I do social media stuff. That shows how incredibly tone deaf and just out of touch she is.
Not grassroots.
Because truth be told, a lot of our
What does that
community
even mean?
is in grassroots.
Have you ever had a
Nonprofit
client list of
organizations that are
transgender people that you
trans-led. Hold
actually
on just
took
a
care
second.
of?
Hold on just a second.
Took care of them like what?
No. Let him cook. Let him cook.
Like paid their bills? No, I don't
Offering
think
them
so.
services, getting them through
I've
services.
helped a lot of trans people in my life,
Trans-led
yes.
organizations that are ran by trans people. I really want to see what you've done for those organizations because I don't see any of y'all on the front line.
I've dedicated my entire life.
Okay, she's gonna talk about social media, but what she means by on the front lines is actually like organizations that give resources to people in need. Like going on to x.com and saying that non-binary people make you upset is not like helping trans people get resources. That's what they're talking about. And like Blair has to just interrupt and try to talk over the trans guy here because she can't actually respond to what he's saying. What he needs to do here is just like take the mic and be like, you know, I need to say this. There's a very clear difference between the kind of work that I've done actually getting resources into the hands of people in need. You know, you can do social media advocacy, but that doesn't mean anything for a trans person who is starving on the street, who is kicked out of their home, and now who can't join the military as their only option for finding stable employment and access to resources because of this transgender military ban, which you are advocating for.
How could it be a circle when I haven't answered the question at all because you keep speaking? I'm
Blair admitting that she hasn't answered the question. Crazy. She can just admit, I haven't answered your question because she knows she can't answer the question.
sure you guys are very proud that you can enter a building and work with 25 people at a time. I access millions every
that
month,
is not
babe.
what
That's what I
nonprofit work
do.
is.
You know, you can.
It's really
so
disappointing that you would ever
disconnected from
equate
that.
This is
community
disappointing,
services.
actually. This is disappointing, actually.
This is very
It's disappointing that you would disrespect all of the people that are in community service and all of these social workers that actually do
Correct.
help trans people.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I think he could have gone on for more. It would have been really good if he could just like been like, I need to say my piece because you keep interrupting me and not responding to my question. Let me explain what I'm trying to mean, what I'm trying to say here. But that was good that he got that in. I actually have looked a little bit about going on to Jubilee. It's something that I would love to do. I know the biggest hurdle is that like they require you to provide like your own transportation to California and back, and like I think they give like a little bit of money, but it's like basically like barely anything to cover just like your time in studio. So it ends up being a decent like business expense to actually be able to go. But I mean, you know, that kind of like support and outreach and exposure. Yeah, maybe it would make up for it, but I would absolutely love to do one of these sometime.
This is where y'all's privilege come in because if y'all don't need
My privilege?
services,
My
from
content is a
trans-
resource.
If you do not need
First
services
of all,
from
ma'am,
non-
Oh my gosh. Okay, the whole question was like, what kind of resource are you going to be providing to the homeless trans person who was trying to join the military because it's their only job, the only job that'll take them, and the trans military ban is going to stop that from happening? Like, what kind of resource can you provide for this person? And then Blair's like, I have my social media videos. Yeah, I'm sure the trans kid who's kicked out of his home for being trans is going to be completely saved because he can watch you complain about non-binary people existing.
There are far
do it
less
for high school, too,
debilitating
or
things that will
education.
disqualify you from access to the military than trans. And if you want to put it on a scale, trans is one of those things that for a lot of people is quite debilitating, whether it's mentally, physically, whatever. If you have
That is a self-report right there. Like, Blair's saying that because of her intense self-hatred. There are plenty of trans people that, like, you know, they've gone through some medical transition, they've socially transitioned, and gender dysphoria is not a problem for them. Like, they have been cured of gender dysphoria because that was their experience. And so Blair trying to act like this is, you know, kind of the primary narrative just really shows, like, her own internal worldview of how much she hates herself. And this is something that's exceptionally true about trans conservatives, pretty broadly speaking, is that, like, being on that side of the culture war, you will internalize so much anti-trans bigotry, and it just results to incredibly potent self-hatred that is mostly motivated by lies. as we've been demonstrating throughout this entire conversation.
Military, I am quite sure that my experience would not look the same as y'all's. And if we can't wake that up, then we're really being complicit.
They don't look at your race.
I don't think your
But
skin tone makes any difference.
Well,
As somebody-
yes, it does.
No,
Well,
as
but
somebody-
it
no,
doesn't.
as somebody who's
But it
serving in the
doesn't.
military,
For you to
as
tell a
somebody
black
who- no,
person that is so
as somebody who's
problematic.
serving,
For you to
So why
tell
do
a
you have
person
to
of
put
color
black in
here,
front of it?
because this is my experience and this is my reality. First of all,
has nothing
that
to
is
do
so
with your transness,
disrespectful
though.
to tell a person
I'm gonna
of
have an
color, a
aneurysm.
black person, how they should feel. How dare you sit up there
Okay,
and
well,
say
no,
that?
it's disrespectful
as
for
somebody
you to
who's
tell a white
serving-
person
Hold on,
that.
just
You
a second. Let me
screamed
finish
at
my
him,
point.
and you just
She didn't tell anybody how they should feel about it. But the point is, so the disconnect between what they're saying is that, like, the conservatives are going to say that, well, racism doesn't exist on the books. Like, there's no, like, rule in the military that says, like, if you're black, then you can't serve, or if you're black, you have to be, like, this much better to serve. But in practice, how these things actually work out with racial biases in committees, in, you know, the people that go through these kinds of approval procedures, military doctors, like the kind of people that are going to do your, like, military checkups, is based off of all the data we have, they tend to apply more scrutiny to black people than white people, just across the board. And so they're more likely to try to dig deeper into your medical history, to try to dig deeper to find something to disqualify you than they would for, like, a white person. And that's what she's trying to explain, but all the people, like, yelling at her are just going deeper into, like, you know, the angry reaction. Why are people so weird about letting femme people talk? The answer is misogyny. In general, like, as a culture, we tend to value what men say more than women, and so it's way more likely for people in general to interrupt women or to not, like, take them as seriously on subjects. Like, yeah. And this affects trans people too. Like, trans people absolutely assimilate into misogyny when they transition in the trans feminine direction. And it's a pretty interesting point that you can highlight in these kind of debates.
Especially when a trans person comes out in the military. Yeah, we have these things enacted, but that doesn't mean that in reality and in physical time that they're being treated under what is in the law that's supposed to protect them. So that's where I'm coming from, or whatever, because reality and what's on paper are two different things.
Hey, she made the point. Yes, there we go. That is the point about, like, whether or not there is non-discrimination on the books does not reflect whether or not there's discrimination in practice. And you can really bring that home with bringing up some actual data. For example, like, bias in court trials, bias in like police pulling people over. Actually, here's a really good one, really good data point to demonstrate this. There was this fantastic study on police pulling people over and, you know, the proportion of people pulled over by race within, like, rural towns. And what they found is that before sunset, black people were significantly more likely to be pulled over than white people for the same crimes. However, this racial disparity went away after sunset when the police couldn't see the race of the people they were pulling over.
I'm not in the military, nor am I a military general, but I trust that military generals know how to get their troops deployment ready. And if someone is able to go through all the rigorous steps, take out the trans, but they've been able to meet medical, health, all of the hoops that need to be met, I don't see any reason to take away someone's opportunity to serve this country and to be proud of serving this country, because being American is something to be proud of.
My king, yeah. I don't have any critique of that point. That was very well put in a way that, like, brings together what people were saying, but also, like, puts forward the correct narrative that, like, these are people genuinely trying their best and trying to help themselves out within situations where they're in need of those resources. Oh, thank goodness we've got one strong soldier in this war.
It's okay for minors to get top surgery.
Ooh, minors getting top surgery. I would love to talk on this one. So I think that in approaching this conversation, so many people are just horrible on their rhetoric. Here's how you approach this conversation. First, we talk about pediatric medicine as something that we generally all agree should exist to some extent. You know, if there's a kid who's sick, we should be able to treat him. Now, whether or not we should be able to treat a kid because of, you know, like, mental distress relating to a physical symptom, that's what we deem in medicine dysphoria, that's really going to depend. And there are tons of examples in the medical literature of cis people that we allow to treat their dysphorias over certain physical conditions or physical realities with surgery. A couple examples are cleft lip surgery if a kid is born with a lip which is abnormal, and they are able to get surgery in order to have a more congruent identity body experience, in order to reduce that kind of discomfort, and in order to reduce bullying, like from their peers. Another example is top surgery for intersex men. Actually, it's way, way, way more likely. The most common case of somebody getting top surgery in all of medicine is intersex men getting top surgery. So men who are born with some extent of mixed sex characteristics very often grow tits during puberty. They're usually kind of smaller boobs, but we routinely allow these intersex men to get their breasts removed because they are discomforted by being a man with boobs. And if you have, say, like a trans boy who is having that same kind of discomfort, who, you know, has been going through the medical system for years, who has like multiple therapist letters, doctor's letters, like the trans man has to go through way more screening to get the exact same procedure that the intersex man does when it's for the exact same purpose, alleviating the mental discomfort of being a boy with boobs. And, you know, maybe it's the case that trans people are just way over-screened compared to cis people. Maybe it's the case that cis people need more screening for these types of procedures, but it's just entirely contradictory to allow one but not the other based off of some arbitrary distinction between, like, you know, intersex cis men should not be able to get should be able to get top surgery, but transgender men should not be able to. Like, there's no reason why one should be allowed but not the other. So yeah, and just being consistent. And I think that this can be a broader conversation about, like, surgery and cis people in general, because there is a lot of requirements that goes into trans people getting surgery that we just don't do for cis people. And, you know, I know it's very common for people to have, like, regrets related to cosmetic surgeries, like plastic surgery, for example. Maybe these cis people need more screening. Maybe the trans people have too much screening. You know, over time, as we get more research, I think we can kind of find a healthy balance of, like, how much screening should go into these types of procedures, and it's going to kind of vary on the condition and just end up with something that values, you know, a healthy risk-benefit analysis for all these things.
Really?
You guys waited on that?
That's pretty vile.
Like, as someone who had top surgery and went on hormones, like, it's a very emotionally intense experience. I think in terms of, like, minors getting surgery, like, the reason why I'm not, like, no to that is because I feel like maybe someone's, like, 17 or something. I honestly feel like it is a really intense surgery.
Yeah, as with all medicine, it's going to be on kind of like a case-by-case basis. I think that there are some, you know, people that are like 17, 18 that are very competent in making their own medical decisions. Meanwhile, there might be some people that they're older and they're still, like, not that competent and comfortable making their own medical decisions, and they might want to go through kind of more screening. So handling things on, like, a case-by-case basis, following best medical practices, is going to do a lot more good than trying to come up with some kind of, like, legislation that's going to specifically attack trans people, for example.
If somebody's, like, 17 or, like, late 16 and, like, feels like it's right for them, I mean, like, people are really different. I know for me, like, top surgery when I was, like, 16 would have been, like, so good, and it would have literally, like, saved my spinal cord from, like, binding all the time. That's why I'm like, yeah, like, I feel like in instances, like, it can make sense.
Another interesting point is that, like, with all the fear-mongering about surgery as, like, a form of transitional medicine, if we, like, bring puberty blockers into the equation, actually plenty of surgeries would become no longer needed for trans people that are able to go on puberty blockers. Like, if you're a trans masculine person and you go on puberty blockers around the onset of puberty, you go on testosterone as soon as you're able to, a couple years down the road, then you would never grow boobs in the first place, and there would be no reason to perform a top surgery. So actually moving forward with, you know, prescribing puberty blockers, which are safe and reversible, would help to avoid the need for surgery in many cases. And yet if somebody, you know, goes on puberty blockers for a year or two, they're talking to a therapist, realizes that, you know, transition is not right for them, they can stop taking them, go through their normal puberty, grow their tits, and be happy with it.
So I don't have the experience or whatnot, but I do think that it has to be done safely. There is a process when it comes to having these types of gender-affirming surgeries. You know what I'm saying? Talking with your parents and then going to endocrinologists and going through therapy to make sure this is right for you. People have a choice to their autonomy. Now, I know that everybody does not, but those that do or whatnot should choose with the right medical education They should choose with safety and with full understanding of what is a benefit and what may not be a benefit.
I agree with a caveat that there does need to be some sort of process, which there is, by the way, in place.
Yes, absolutely.
Sometimes there's a slip through. Yes, things happen because, again, as I said earlier, this is a big world.
Yeah, I feel like whenever this conversation comes up, people like don't bring up the analogy of intersex men that get top surgery, even though they make up way more top surgeries than trans men, and they have to go through way less screening. Like, oftentimes, an intersex man who's like 14, 15, 16 can get top surgery, the same top surgery that you know, trans men get, without any kind of doctor's letter, without any kind of like therapist intervention. They can just go to like their general practitioner, get recommended to a surgeon, and that's that. We just like rush intersex men through getting top surgery without batting an eye when we make trans men go through so many hoops of getting doctors and therapist letters. When you bring that up, it really shows how like people completely ignore the majority case because they're like hyperfixating on trans people.
And as somebody who has experienced top surgery and also waited quite a bit of time, a lot of severe damage actually was created to my rib cage that my wife, who is half my size, actually has the same size rib cage in the back as mine. And these are permanent damage to my body because I binded for about 8 years, and there's even still issues that I have with breathing and certain issues that I face.
Ooh, that's an interesting point. Yeah, if we were to stop trans men from being able to seek, you know, top surgery, there would be an increase in trans men that are forced to bind as their only option, wearing like really restrictive like chest equipment to reduce the appearance of boobs. And they can lead to some pretty bad complications like long-term binding. But for trans men who have to choose between suffering from pretty bad gender dysphoria, from being, you know, perhaps clocked and put into a dangerous situation, or their physical safety, that's a really bad catch-22 where either way you're going to face some harm, yet access to surgery in cases where it's deemed to be medically beneficial after a, you know, thorough analysis, discussion with doctors, could have prevented all of that.
You know, unfortunately, if I had that surgery a lot earlier, I would have a better posture. I'd have a lot of pain that is not within my body that I have to deal with on a daily basis, while simultaneously the idea that, you know, I get maybe under 16 top surgery would be something that would possibly even make me a little uncomfortable, but I also know that I was homeless at 16, paying my own rent, and left my home at 16 and had to live my life as an adult very early. So I was able to make those decisions for myself.
Ooh, the emancipated minor discussion is another really good one. Actually, many states do allow you, if you're an emancipated minor, for example, as in minor that doesn't have parents, either you were disowned or sought your own independence, to make their own medical decisions. And so, you know, if a 16-year-old who's emancipated can make their own medical decisions, why couldn't they get top surgery if they're trans?
And I look at some of these younger kids, and there's a sense of jealousy there and excitement for them at the same time, because they now have access to memories and being in the space and being in a comfortable body that, you know, I had a lot of isolation growing up in my childhood because I didn't feel comfortable to present in a female space or a male space. I was isolated constantly from school, from the outside world, from my family. And my transition, my top surgery, has done nothing but take physical pain off my body, especially with as large-chested as I was and having to bind for as many years as I did.
He is just cooking, as always.
I don't think any minor should be having life-altering elective surgery or life-altering elective medicalization.
I don't think that she genuinely believes that. Like, if a minor were to have cleft lip and be forced to undergo, you know, physical discomfort in addition to mental anguish, dysphoria over having a cleft lip, have to undergo bullying by peers that, you know, just shame and shun people for having abnormal bodies, you wouldn't allow them to get a surgery that is largely successful, like overwhelmingly successful. You wouldn't allow that? That's crazy.
When I work on bills across the country that do ban this for minors, there's a couple things I point out. I point out that I don't think a 16-year-old female who wants breast implants should be able to get that either.
Now, the interesting thing is they often can get breast implants or breast reductions, or even like plastic surgery. There are absolutely ways that underage minors do get those procedures. And if you look at the bills that are going through the country banning trans people from accessing, gender affirming care as minors, they don't ban this other stuff. Like, the bans are specifically targeting trans people. I've even seen some of these anti-trans bills that include explicit exceptions for intersex people getting the exact same procedures as trans people. Whereas, like, if you're an intersex boy, you can get top surgery, and it explicitly says you can, but then a trans boy couldn't get the exact same procedure. They've even included, like, stipulations that would allow and explicitly allow, like, the non-consensual genital surgery on intersex babies that still happen to this day. Like, heinous stuff. Like, literally allowing intersex babies to have their genitals forcibly altered without their consent, but not allowing a 17-year-old trans boy to get the exact same procedure that 17-year-old cis boys get all the time.
Surgeries and stuff like that, they're not life-saving. They're not, if you don't get it, you're not going to die.
Yeah, the bar for elective surgeries would include things like cleft lip surgery, would include common elective surgeries on minors. I mean, circumcision is another example that is incredibly widely practiced in the US, but circumcision is a very heinous procedure. Tonsillectomies are often not medically necessary. That's another good one. Appendectomy, sometimes not even medically necessary. Yeah, there are plenty of, like, elective surgeries that minors are routinely able to access. You will never see these types fearmonger about those surgeries, like, by name. Oh, like, braces could be another example, yeah.
When I think about surgery, I'm actually vehemently against surgery. Like, all of it. Top surgery, bottom surgery, all of it. Particularly because you need your genitals.
What? Does this guy think that getting bottom surgery is them just cutting your genitals off? Because bottom surgery is reconstructive. Like, they use the tissue of your current genitals to make a new set of genitals. Also, he says that he's against top surgery because you need your genitals. If you get your boobs removed, that has nothing to do with your genitals.
Like, it's just that simple.
Hello.
You have these people now who have non-functioning fake penises and vaginas that...
What do you mean by non-functioning? Because, like, if the purpose of the vagina, in the case of a trans woman who's had a vaginoplasty, is for it to be pleasurable, then it's perfectly functional. If their goal is to, like, give birth to a baby out of it, then they wouldn't be getting the surgery because it doesn't do that. Like, I feel like this guy just doesn't understand, like, why people actually get these surgeries.
You've had issues like, for instance, Richie had where, like, your urethra folds in half and then you can't pee no more.
And with, like, the kind of complications that he's talking about, like, those can be treated. And complications are relatively common in any form of surgery. And in most cases, the overwhelming majority of cases, complications can be treated. You just have to go back and then they can fix it up and you'll be good.
Like you said, it's not like you have appendicitis. It's not like you've got, like, a bone spur. It's, like, you don't...
I disagree with that because I was in
surgery,
physical pain, and the moment that I got that top surgery, the pain was
well,
alleviated.
that means you needed a breast reduction, my friend.
Honestly, like, my ribs are like, I'm like, ew, I hate my ribs. Like, they're all like messed up.
Is that an issue with safety of binding, though? I'm actually curious.
Yeah,
about
like,
this.
honestly,
it's the
but
safety
the
of,
thing
of
is,
how
too,
they
like,
teach you to
I
bind?
think
Wait, the safety of how they teach you to bind. Who's teaching you to bind? Like, I mean, I'm sure most of these conservatives don't want, like, queer people talked about in, like, public school. And if they don't want queer people to be able to access, like, gender affirming care, who's going to teach these trans boys how to bind safely? Like, you could do this in a sex education class that covered queer topics, where you're like, oh yeah, some trans masculine people wear binders to, like, cover up their chest. But it's important to bind safely because binding for too long or wearing a binder that's not the right size can expose you to severe, like, rib damage over time. But if they also can't talk to, like, a gender affirming care specialist, then who are they going to learn that from? Like, the worldview that these conservatives create makes it impossible for them to get this knowledge in an easily accessible way, but then also says, like, they should have this knowledge, which they're not giving them easy access to.
Top surgery and testosterone, like, I had to go through, like, a really big process, and I think that's my thing, is, like, instead of an age thing, I think there's, like, there should be a process. You should have to, like, live as that gender and be seeking care and be having, like, a therapist for long-term and a psychiatrist for long-term and an endocrinologist for long-term.
Yeah, that's the world we currently live in with respect to trans minors. Like, trans minors cannot get access to gender affirming care without, like, months of gender therapy and therapist letters. And that's for, like, puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, and then surgery often requires even more therapist letters. and that's not even counting like the years-long wait list that there often are for these procedures. That means that, you know, most of the time when like a minor starts seeking out, say, like top surgery or bottom surgery, like they'll get on the wait list while they're still a minor, and then they won't even actually receive the surgery until they're 18 plus.
This is definitely the prompt that I am the most passionate about, because I think there are few things more vile, more irresponsible, more, you know, dangerous than saying a child can consent to permanently removing a body part that serves an extremely important function. Detransitioners all over the country.
So, I mean, this happens literally all the time. And another thing that you can draw is that actually in the medical literature, they don't talk about minors providing informed consent. It's the consent-assent model for minors, as in you have to have your parents or legal guardians providing the informed consent, who are there for all of the consultations, who have all of the, you know, risk-benefit information as well, in addition to the assent of the minor. And we do this for tons of procedures, including some of the things you mentioned before, like tonsillectomies, appendectomies. Like, minors can provide assent, especially once you're talking about like teenagers.
Can never breastfeed their children if they can even have them, because if they did other things, that can stop them from having kids at all, right?
This is all like explained to them before they get the procedure, and they are encouraged and referred to fertility preservation services before they get these kind of procedures, because they keep this in mind. Like, if you really care about like preserving fertility, then you should try to push for initiatives and advocacy and education on access to sperm banks, access to, you know, egg freezing, instead of just like attacking trans people who already know this.
To a sex change, to gender affirming surgery. If you believe that, there's really nothing that you can believe they can't consent to, right?
You can believe that they can't provide assent to something that is going to net harm them based off of a risk-benefit analysis. Like, the entire point of medicine is that there's going to be a risk-benefit analysis on a kind of a case-by-case basis. Like, for example, when we're talking about, you know, surgery to treat a dysphoria, like in a cleft lip example, in a top surgery example, like, we handle these things on a case-by-case basis. You know, there's some things, like, say if somebody is dealing with, like, body image issues, where that doesn't reach the kind of clinical significance where it's healthy for them to seek surgery, or where the surgery doesn't actually treat the root cause. But there are other cases, like gender dysphoria, like, you know, the cleft lip surgery, where the surgeries are exceptionally effective at treating the root cause of the dysphoria. So that's why we handle it on a case-by-case basis, based off of a risk-benefit analysis, just trying to do the most good for the most people.
That's pretty extreme. That's a permanent body modification under the best circumstances. So you want to move aside all the complications, all the things you can't do, the sterilization, not being able to feed your kids. You could even set that aside. Just the permanent body modification, I mean, you have to be so demented to believe that a child fully understands.
When Blair White is putting all those things on the side, I think that you can really grill her on the cleft lip example. It's really good to come into these kinds of conversations with like clear, solid examples that really like isolate the factors you're talking about, because we routinely allow minors to seek body modification, especially if it's the case of abnormalities, and people tend to not bat an eye at that. So Blair trying to say that like any kind of body modification is like a harm as a whole, you can absolutely dunk on her on that.
You have a 17-year-old's like living as male for like 5 years.
The prompt was about minors, and 12-year-olds are getting top surgery. So
where are 12-year-olds getting top surgery? Where is this happening? I don't think that's actually happening. Like, 12-year-olds can barely even get on puberty blockers. What? I think she's just or unless she's talking about like intersex boys, because intersex boys can get this exact same procedure way earlier and with way less scrutiny than trans boys can. Is Blair actually talking about like intersex boys? Because she might be using intersex boys to attack trans men, which is the greatest piece of irony in this entire thing.
There's a nuanced conversation about even 17-year-olds, I guess, because the age of consent in some places is lower, but that's not what's happening, right? It's 12-year-olds.
No, it's not. And wait, is she even willing to have the conversation about like 17-year-olds? And is the legal age of consent her standard, or is it whether or not somebody's able to provide an informed decision making? Because we've done like studies on like the neurology and like decision making processes, mental capacity of people, and by about the age of 12, people generally have most of the mental capacities that are required to have a voice in your own medical decision making. Not necessarily to do all of the medical decision making, but to at least have a voice, to at least, you know, provide assent for your medical care by about the age of 12. And the fact that we routinely accept this for cis people shows that we should probably treat trans people the same way.
Thing is, when we talk about detransitioners or whatnot, all I hear is a lot of regret, right?
And if you want to talk about the detransition phenomenon, especially with respect to surgery, like gender affirming surgeries have way lower regret rates than other elective surgeries. I know that like knee replacement surgery has a regret rate of about 20%, LASIK eye surgery has a regret rate of about 5%, and then gender affirming surgeries across the board, regret rates are 1 to 2% consistently. This is another question that often comes up in these kind of debates that I think is very helpful, is like, if you're talking to a conservative, you know, you can bring up with any medical procedure we provide, there is going to be some rate of regret. What do you think is the acceptable rate of regret to provide care for a certain population, be they adults or minors? Because like, you know, minors getting like tonsillectomies, like we talked about earlier, there's a regret rate for that. What is an acceptable regret rate? Because they love to pretend that like zero regret is the only acceptable way to do medicine on children. But if that's the world, then we can't do any kind of pediatric medicine. We can't treat any medical condition in children because there's always going to be at least some medical regret. And if they do give you like some kind of regret rate, then trans affirming care is one of the lowest regret rate procedures in all of modern medicine.
The reason why I'm against it is because, like you said, the children need to go through the proper steps, the parents, the doctors, but in the state of California, if you, as a parent, tell your minor, no, you're not getting this, I'm not affirming your gender, I'm taking your kids away, and California is going to raise your kids for you. So how's that?
That's not how it works. So there was a proposed legislation in California, proposed, that essentially what the legislation would do is, in child custody hearings, they would consider whether or not parents affirm their child's transgender identity in handling custody disputes as one of multiple factors, one of many factors that determine custody disputes. Not saying that if a parent doesn't affirm their trans kid, then the state of California will raise your kids for you. That's not what the proposed, not even passed law, it was just a proposed law would have done. And yeah, if a parent is not allowing their kid to seek medical care for a condition which they have diagnosed, for example, I think that should weigh into their custody hearing. Like if a parent is anti-medicine, that doesn't seem like they're very good at parenting their kid. Like if a parent was refusing to let their kid talk to a therapist for depression, or if a parent was refusing to let their kid, say, even like seek physical medical care, that's bad parenting, and the state should absolutely consider that in child custody hearings.
Safeguards that you're talking about, they're not happening.
Yeah, that's
They're
what
not
I'm saying.
happening at all.
California will
and
take your
we
kids.
we know because there was a whistleblower out of St. Louis, and this isn't some conservative whistleblower. She was married to a trans man.
Oh, she's talking about Jamie Reed. Jamie Reed is indeed a conservative and has been proven to have been lying about a ton of the things that she said when she claimed to be like a whistleblower. Like it has been proved that she. Oh, there was. I know there was one that came out recently where she said that like some person's like medical complication side effect was due to their trans related healthcare, when like in the clinical notes it specifically said it was due to a different condition that the kid had, but she was trying to blame it on them being trans when it was literally like related to a different physical health condition that the kid had. So like she was proven to be a liar, just trying to spin an anti-trans narrative.
She blew the whistle and said that they had an in-house doctor. If you couldn't find a affirming therapist to sign off on the form, they would pencil whip it.
The whole reason why they have like an in-house therapist that can do that is because they've been working with these kids for like months, and they've been screening these kids for months, and so if they have ongoing clinical experience with these kids, then they're qualified to write the letters. Like Jamie Reed is just lying about the situation. she's been outed as a liar like multiple times as the internal review has gone over what she claimed versus what was actually happening in this clinic in the notes.
This is the reason why they're shutting down the Tavistock clinic in the UK, though, is because they found that when you start a child on hormone or on puberty blockers, then hormones, it's basically a foregone conclusion that they're going to end up having surgery.
There is two major pieces of misinformation which she just spewed out. First off, saying that the Tavistock clinic was like closed down because they're pulling back gender affirming care in the UK. That's not true. The reason why they closed down the Tavistock clinic is because the Tavistock clinic used to be the single major one gender clinic for all of the UK, but they realized we don't have enough resources to treat everybody with just one clinic, so we're going to branch off into multiple more local clinics rather than having just one central clinic. And the other thing is that even if trans kids go on puberty blockers, they're not like guaranteed to get surgery. The data we have shows that a trans kid who's been on puberty blockers for years overwhelmingly will continue on to hormones because the processes we have in place are really good at identifying the kids who are actually trans before puberty blockers are even offered. And so you have like a 99% continuation rate showing that the system is very much working at identifying who is genuinely trans and genuinely benefits from this treatment. But the continuation rate from hormones to surgery is actually way less. The total number of trans people that get bottom surgery is about like 10% of trans people. I think that's 10% of trans women. For trans men, it's even lower. So yeah, that's just not true. Plenty of trans people are perfectly happy with their bodies after hormones and don't feel like they need surgery. More so often like the trans feminine direction. Although like if we're talking about like trans men who went on puberty blockers, they don't even need top surgery because they never grew boobs in the first place. So saying that all of these trans men are going on to surgery is just not true. Like they don't even need top surgery anymore.
If it is your child, it is your choice what you do with your kid.
I think that there's a way that you can approach that point, talking about. I don't like the blanket statement of like it's your child, your choice, because like parents routinely subject their kids to like heinous stuff that is completely unnecessary. Like for example, circumcision. I don't think that parents should just be allowed to circumcise their kid because they want their penis to look a certain way. Like circumcision is genuinely a net benefit to the body in most cases, unless there is a particular medical condition which requires the removal of the foreskin. Circumcision is entirely medically unnecessary, and the touted benefits of circumcision are based off of ignoring like broader data points, which are just weaponized in a disingenuous way to post hoc justify the conclusion. Just keep on continuing circumcising kids. But you can bring up the point that like, why should we have the government like interfering with this medical process between doctors and patients, where, you know, doctors working under licensed medical organizations following standards of care that are backed in research and data is going to be a lot better at providing individualized per person care rather than politicians who don't know jack shit. You can absolutely weaponize people's general distrust against politicians within this point to bring up that like politicians do not know better than doctors and medical organizations. Just saying that like parents should have absolute choice over their children, I don't agree with that.
In the state of California, from my understanding, someone who's 16 can also drop out of high school, which would severely affect their life. And they have access to that decision if they want to, because say they want to get into the job market or whatever their reason is, but they have that option to make that choice at 16. I will agree with you that someone at 12, I'd be uncomfortable with somebody at 12 years old getting surgery completely, because there's still a lot of the world for them to learn about themselves, how to navigate it, et cetera, et cetera. But for us to have access to be able to drop out of high school if we wanted to, and make such a life-changing decision that could affect, you economically, socially, so many different ways. But then to say, you know what, you're not old enough to make this decision, for me, again, as somebody who was 16 and was in such a religious family and all the restrictions that I had, if I didn't have access to those things, I don't know if I would be here.
Oh my goodness, my king. Yeah, the emancipated minors point is a really solid point that I don't think any of the conservatives can respond to. All the conservative states where child marriage is legal, that yet they're trying to pass laws restricting trans people. Getting married as a child is probably way more life-altering than getting gender-affirming care. Especially if you're comparing like child marriage to like puberty blockers or hormones, where, if you're on puberty blockers, you can go off of them, your puberty will start back up just as normal. And even if you're on hormones for like a couple of months and you're like, wow, this does not feel good. By the way, this is actually what happens in the overwhelming majority of detransitioners who genuinely realize they're not trans. I guess I should clarify further that most often when somebody detransitions, it's only a temporary detransition because they didn't have social support, they didn't have money, they couldn't afford their healthcare, and they intend to go back on hormones as soon as they can. The next most common like detransition are detransitioners who tried hormones for just a little bit, were like, that feels wrong, I don't like how this makes my body feel, I don't like this is not right for me. They go off of it immediately, and you know, with only being on hormones for maybe a couple months at most, there's basically no long-term effects of that. And that was that. It was just like they tried something, it didn't really work out, and they're not really any different. Like, detransitioners who go through a lot, and then detransition are exceptionally rare. That's why whenever you see these, like, anti-trans hearings, they only bring the same, like, 5 detransitioners who are, like, paid off by conservative media sources to go to every single hearing across the country, because there's so few of them. And in those cases, like, I have genuine empathy for anyone that experiences medical regret, and we are only going to get better at both identifying who is going to genuinely benefit from treatment, as well as performing reversal procedures for detransitioners as we do more research. Like, the better we are at providing transition healthcare, the better we're going to be at providing detransition healthcare. Because if, you know, you can transition from one way to the other on, you know, with respect to sexual characteristics, then you could also detransition back using those same processes, using those same kind of procedures. And we're only going to get better at that.